This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about Peter Zeihan's Bitcoin Lyin. For those of you who don't know who Peter Zeihan is, he's a geopolitical analyst that was recently on the Joe Rogan Experience. My personal opinion, and again, this is just an opinion, is that he's probably a spook. He's also a very obnoxious, arrogant human being. I'm not going to play this because I'm a little bit worried that YouTube might copyright strike it or do something, but I'm going to link to the relevant clip in this tweet, and so you can listen to it. It's almost a 2-minute clip from the Joe Rogan show, and he makes a bunch of arguments against Bitcoin that a lot of you have been asking about, and he does it in as I said, a quite arrogant way. So let's just start and break down the various arguments he makes. He starts off by saying that there's no intrinsic value to this asset, and when he says asset, he puts it in scare quotes. And then he says it's now starting to be priced appropriately. And you can hear Joe Rogan sort of groan in the background saying, really, man, is it going to go down? And Peter Zeihan says, well, where's Bitcoin? It's currently at $16,000. I think it has another $17,000 to go down. He's obviously being a little bit tongue in cheek there, but he thinks it's definitely a zero. He goes on to say there's no intrinsic value to this product. Well, I want to start off by telling Peter and reminding Peter Zeihan, Bitcoin is not a financial product. I think that's definitely the wrong word to use. It's not a product issued by some bank or financial institution. It's a digital commodity without an issuer that's globally distributed. What's the next argument he makes? Zeihan says that there's no intrinsic value to this asset. Now, I hate XRP and Hex and ETH and Cardano and all the ship coins as much as the next guy, but even I'm not going to be intellectually dishonest enough and pretend that they're not assets. They're definitely assets. All these ship coins are assets, as is Bitcoin. In fact, XRP, Hex, and ETH are a special kind of asset called an unregistered security. This means that the way that they were issued violates U.S. securities law, and even if they were issued outside of the U.S., the fact that they're trading on U.S. exchanges is a violation of U.S. securities law, and we were watching the SEC in the process of mopping up this mess of ship coins. Now, Bitcoin is an asset too, and I don't know how you can deny it. It seems very intellectually dishonest. You can say I hate it, you can say I think it's going to zero, but to say it's not an asset, it's certainly not a liability. Bitcoin is a digital asset, but it's a digital commodity. It's not an unregistered security because it does not have an issuer. So what does Peter Zeihan then go on to mean by saying that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value? This is one of those words that's used a lot among Bitcoin critics, and they never really define what they mean by it, and no one ever really calls them out on it. So what is intrinsic value? I know what it means in the value investing schools. We're going to talk about how is he using it. Does he mean utility value? So he's saying that Bitcoin's not useful. A lot of people in the global south would disagree with him. A lot of people who use the Lightning Network, a lot of people who store their savings in Bitcoin would say that Bitcoin actually does have utility value. It's quite useful. Is Peter Zeihan saying that it doesn't have commodity value? It's not a physical commodity. Well, this is obvious, but it is a digital commodity. Commodity value might be something like you can eat wheat, you can refine crude oil, you can drink orange juice, etc. So it's unclear what he means by intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is a very slippery term. You might ask, what's the intrinsic value of the US dollar or gold or Apple? And you won't find two people who agree on the same intrinsic value. The only two people who agree on the same intrinsic value would be the two people who are trading that asset at the very moment. So if I buy gold from you, I agree on the purchase price and you agree on the selling price, and we agree presumably on the intrinsic value, though you may think the intrinsic value is lower for that gold, which is why you're selling it to me, etc. So intrinsic value, very slippery term. You can use it and sound really smart, but it's very difficult to know what Peter Zeihan means by this. Again, intrinsic value comes out of the value investing school of Warren Buffett and Ben Graham, and if you go to value investing conferences, you always hear people talking about intrinsic value. An example would be, for example, Coke. The stock Coca-Cola is currently trading at $62 a share. Let's say that I think Coke has intrinsic value of 124 because they're going to put the cocaine back in it in 5 years from now. So I think it's undervalued because it's about to become a highly addictive must-have beverage. So what I would say is the intrinsic value is $124 per share. I'm buying it at a 50% discount at $62 a share, a 50% discount to intrinsic value. So that's one way of using the word intrinsic value. If I'd like to see Peter Zeihan's model that he's using for intrinsic value for Bitcoin. Why does he think it's worth zero? Of course, he never elaborates on this because then he'd actually have to have a real debate instead of just sitting there all arrogant and pretending like he's saying something. So again, different people will have different views on intrinsic value. It's not some objective thing that everyone can point to and agree on. And this is not just true for Bitcoin. As I said, it's true for the US dollar. It's true for real estate. It's true for stocks. Everyone has a different value of what something should be worth. And I would say that Peter Zeihan should probably employ a bit more humility, since Bitcoin has been trading firmly north of zero since at least 2010. Even pieces of garbage like Cardano and XRP, they seem to have trouble going to zero. So to even be predicting that Bitcoin's going to go to zero, if it becomes another XRP, it's going to go to 30 cents. It won't be able to go to zero, probably, as long as you have a few people trading it back and forth. So none of his arguments make any sense to me. Conclusion here: no asset in this world has an objective intrinsic value that everyone agrees on. The one thing we do know is what financial markets are currently valuing things at, and you can agree with it or you can disagree with it. But right now, the free market is still valuing Bitcoin as if it's worth a whole lot more than zero. We're going to go on to the rest of Peter Zeihan's arguments, but I'd ask you right now, if you're enjoying this video and finding it useful, just hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and help to make this channel available to more people through the YouTube algorithm. Zeihan goes on to say that Bitcoin can never be a currency because a currency is a medium of exchange and a store of value. As I've gone over in many videos, Bitcoin is currently being used as a medium of exchange in many places. There are many things you can buy with Bitcoin. So it is functioning as an emerging medium of exchange. It's also a very good store of value. And so I don't understand why Peter Zeihan would be arguing against Bitcoin in favor of something like this instead. If you're going to say that Bitcoin cannot be a currency because it's not a good store of value, how can you argue that the US dollar is a currency when it has been such a horrible store of value over long periods of time? The next thing Peter Zeihan goes on to say is that a currency has to be managed in terms of trust. Imagine arguing that trusting a few lawyers and investment bankers and economics professors with a money printer is the best way to do things, especially after all the inflation that we've seen over the past 3 years. Imagine trusting human beings with your money. And that is what we've done, and that is why we have the mess. And these are guys who have no idea what they're doing. We have Powell saying that inflation is transitory, then saying it's not transitory. So the legacy financial system is definitely not a better system than Bitcoin. If you hear the noise in the background, I have to apologize. There is quite a bit of rain on the roof where I'm recording this right now. So hopefully it's not too loud. Let me know if you can hear the rain. I'd be curious. Next, Peter Zeihan argument is Bitcoin can never be used for trade because there's not enough of it to go around. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. I've been meaning to address this. I think this is one of the silliest arguments that you can make. And there are a couple different ways you can make it, or you can argue against this. The first thing, as we know, 1 Bitcoin is equal to 100 million sats. It's automatically divided into that. And there are, of course, 21 million Bitcoin maximum. Probably 4 or 5 million of them are lost permanently, but let's just assume, because as you'll see, that the actual numbers don't matter that much. But assuming all of these sats and Bitcoin can still be accessed, that's 2.1 quadrillion total sats. I think I'm doing the math right. I'm just multiplying 21 million times 100 million. You get 2.1 quadrillion, which is one magnitude higher than a trillion. So we're talking a very large number. Now let's assume a population of 10 billion people on Earth in a few years. If we do the long division, that's 210,000 sats per person at whatever point in time when there are 10 billion people on Earth. At sat dollar parity, in other words, when 1 Satoshi equals $1, that's $210,000 in current purchasing power per capita per person globally. Now that seems like enough money to me to lubricate the global economy. We're at a point right now, do individuals in the global south have net worths of $210,000 today? People don't even have net worths quite that high on average in the developed world, and yet the economy still seems to function. So I think there'll be enough money sloshing around in the world on a Bitcoin standard. When 1 Satoshi is equivalent to $2 purchasing power today, that would be $420,000 in purchasing power, current purchasing power per capita globally. So you can see how the money supply or the purchasing power or the total value of Bitcoin can expand as the value and purchasing power of each Bitcoin or Satoshi goes up. The other way you can achieve this is you can, especially when you reach a certain point where 1 Satoshi becomes really so valuable that you would like to subdivide it, what you could do is you could do a hard fork or a soft fork, rewrite Bitcoin core software to further subdivide those Satoshis further into microsats or millisats. I believe you can trade fractions of a Satoshi on the Lightning Network. You can send fractions of a Satoshi on the Lightning Network as we speak. So this is not a problem. This is basically just moving the decimal point. It's a very simple change to the Bitcoin code that I think everyone would agree on at a certain point in time. So this really is a non-issue, and you'll find that it's usually the most ignorant people who are using this kind of argument against the Bitcoin standard, and they usually also happen to be very sympathetic to Keynesian economics, and they just think the way of having central banks and having governments printing money is a much better way of doing things. Later on in that clip, Peter Zeihan says that the problem with Bitcoin is that if you ever adopted Bitcoin as your money, as your global money, you would end up with monetary inflation. Now, this is a very strange term. This is not how economists speak. But what he's basically saying is he's saying number go up. He's saying that if Bitcoin adoption happens, the price per Bitcoin is going to go up a lot. Now, what does this mean? What's the opposite, or what's another way of saying your money is increasing in purchasing power? There's another word for this. When the value of your money increases in purchasing power, it's called deflation. And what that means is that things are getting cheaper for you. It means that the prices of the goods and services that you consume keep going down relative to the money that you're holding, to the purchasing power of the money that you're holding. So you can call it deflation. That means prices going up. It means prices of goods and services going down, or you can call it monetary inflation, but the more normal term would be deflation. And it's important to note here, as we've talked about in other videos, that deflation is actually a good thing. Do you like paying more or less for the same thing? Obviously, we all like paying less money for the same thing and the same quality. Deflation, this is propaganda. If you hate deflation, you've been propagandized by Keynesians and central bankers. Deflation is only a bad thing in a fiat economy that's built on a foundation of debt. So if you have a lot of debt and you end up with deflation, this is very bad. The U.S. government has a lot of debt, and so they definitely don't want to see deflation. But don't buy into the central banker propaganda, though, about how economies need some inflation. They do not. Inflation is the government theft of your time and energy. That's what it is. It's theft by politicians and central bankers. And one way to visualize this, if you've never thought of this before, is to perform the following thought experiment. Let's say that you could work really hard for 1 year and you were able to save 100% of your earnings. Take that money, put it under your bed in cash, put it in US dollars, for example, which is what Peter Zeihan seems to like a lot. And then in 20 years from now, take that box out and try living on that money solely for 1 year. You're not going to be able to, obviously. When I was a kid, you could get a McDonald's Big Mac for 50, 60 cents. Today, it's obviously more like $5 or $6 or $10 or whatever it is, depending where you are. So inflation is a bad thing. Inflation is what enslaves us. Deflation is a good thing, and this is what the Bitcoin standard will bring. And the sooner you move to a Bitcoin standard, the more you will benefit from this as you see the purchasing power of your Bitcoin appreciate. I want to conclude by asking the question, is Peter Zeihan the next Peter Schiff? If you know Peter Schiff of Goldbug fame, who's on Twitter and is extremely annoying with his endless and ignorant and misleading Twitter rants about Bitcoin, he's obviously suffering from BDS, Bitcoin derangement syndrome, and both Peter Schiff and if Peter Zeihan joins him are condemned to look extremely stupid for the next 100 years. They'll look smart for periods of 12 to 18 months, but most of the time they will look really stupid. Here's Peter Schiff hiding from Bitcoin, clutching his gold bar, and here's Peter Schiff hating on Bitcoin while it was at $1, while it was at $10,000, and he'll still be hating on Bitcoin when Bitcoin is $1 million per Bitcoin and gold is still trading at $1,700 an ounce. So I would advise Peter Zeihan, please get counseling while you still can, because not only is Bitcoin going to win, not only are we going to be laughing at you the whole way up, but Bitcoin is also going to make it much harder to finance all of those wars that you're a megaphone for and that you love so much. The other thing I wanted to end on is this is always the problem. If you listen to someone and they sound smart, and then you figure out that they are really ignorant and intellectually dishonest about something that you know something about, in this case Bitcoin, that makes it really difficult to trust them on anything else. So I now have complete distrust in Peter Zeihan when it comes to anything he says about the economy or about geopolitics, just based on how bad and how arrogant this take on Bitcoin was. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.